Warning: this video contains content that may disturb you and challenge your perception of reality. Ensure you're in a safe space before you continue. Hello and welcome to Charlie Ghostlight. I'm Charlie. Tonight's stories aren't legends or rumors. They're real, recent, and absolutely chilling. These three true events didn't just shake the news. They left deep, dark questions behind. Get ready, because what you're about to hear might just haunt your thoughts long after the screen goes black. They called it Flight 171, a sleek Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, bright white body, Air India red tail, 242 souls inside. It lifted off from Ahmedabad's runway on June 12, 2025, engines humming like a heartbeat. A flight to London, a regular day, a plane full of students, tourists, business travelers, families, 12 crew, 2 pilots, everyone buckled in. Some watching the safety video, some scrolling through their phones. One man reportedly asleep before takeoff. 36 seconds later, the plane vanished.
Mayday, 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 no power, no thrust, going down.
And then? Silence. The aircraft slammed into a medical college building barely a mile from the runway. A fireball devoured the structure, metal twisted, concrete ruptured. What remained of the plane was scattered across shattered dorm rooms, a library, and the dreams of almost 300 families. One survivor, a man thrown from the wreckage like a broken toy, found alive near the emergency exit, dazed, burnt, breathing. He remembers nothing, except a loud bang.
It wasn't supposed to happen.
This was Boeing's pride, the Dreamliner, a technological marvel, lightweight carbon fiber frame, digitized systems, over a decade in service with no fatal crashes. It was their safest plane. Until it wasn't. And as investigators swarmed the wreckage, black boxes were pulled from the rear of the aircraft, intact, almost waiting to be found. But they weren't the only things unearthed that week. Half a world away, in Charleston, South Carolina, John Barnett was found dead. A longtime Boeing employee, a whistleblower, a man who had spoken out, again and again, about safety shortcuts and faulty parts. He said planes were being rushed, that people were under pressure to ignore problems, that 787s were being built with critical flaws, and no one wanted to listen. And then, just hours before Flight 171 went down, Barnett was discovered in his truck. A bullet wound to the head, a gun in his hand. Ruled a suicide. Case closed. Too convenient. Too clean. Because he was scheduled to give more evidence that week. Files, videos, reports. Gone. They said he took his own life. But some believe something else took it from him. Something that didn't want the truth to land before that plane did. What caused the crash? That's still the question. Investigators say the engines went to idle seconds after takeoff. A power system called FADEC, the brain that controls the engines, may have glitched. The ram air turbine was deployed, a signal of total electrical failure. But that doesn't explain why it failed so fast, or why no one could stop it. Some said the engines didn't fail. They were told to fail, that the FADEC was never switched from ground mode to flight mode, that the sensors thought the plane was still on the runway, so the engines never gave full thrust. Like the plane wasn't allowed to leave the ground. Like it was being pulled back. A weight, a force, something unseen. And here's where it gets strange. Because this wasn't just a crash. It was a pattern. A Dreamliner goes down, a whistleblower dies. And behind them both, shadows. Felicia Simeon once said the sky was hunting her. John Barnett once said Boeing was building death, not just through rubble, but through timelines. Timings, numbers. Barnett dies. Hours later, a 787 with a questionable maintenance record plummets from the sky. Air India's past shows a chain of near misses, failing APUs, ground power reliance. The plane that crashed had passed inspection, but that only means one thing. If there was a flaw, someone missed it, or ignored it, or worse, someone knew. Because sometimes, in horror, the monster isn't hiding in the dark. It's right there, smiling, wearing a corporate badge.
The crash site wasn't sealed properly. People wandered through it, filming, touching debris. Fire trucks drove over wings. Whatever evidence might have existed, compromised. Some say on purpose, some say by accident, but some don't think it matters anymore, because they believe the evidence is somewhere else now. In the air. In the silence after the engines go quiet. In the sound of a voice that never finished its mayday. They say you can't cheat death. But what if someone cheated the truth instead? What if Barnett didn't die because he was wrong, but because he was right? And what if Flight 171 didn't crash because of failure, but because of revenge? Revenge of systems ignored. Revenge of warnings buried. Revenge of ghosts who don't care for boardroom meetings or engineering excuses. You can ground planes. You can silence a whistleblower. But you can't silence justice when it's falling from 600 feet. Screaming. They say horror lives in haunted houses. Sometimes it lives in the sky. And sometimes it flies coach. Flight 171 never had a chance. Maybe John Barnett didn't either. And maybe we'll never know what happened. Because some crashes leave wreckage. Others leave in silence. And in that silence, something is still watching.
They say in the halls of power, truth is the first casualty. In 2020, Philip Haney became that casualty, a man who spent years inside the Department of Homeland Security, specializing in tracking terrorist networks. A truth teller, he said, an insurgent against bureaucracy, he said, a man who burned with the belief that the government was hiding secrets about jihadist infiltration. But then, on a cold morning in California, he was dead, a gunshot wound, a pistol, a body found in his truck in the parking lot behind his home. A scene so controlled, it looked like it had been arranged. But for 2 years, no one spoke. Then, the autopsy came back. Suicide. They ruled it suicide. 48 hours later, whispers began rising, and they became roars. Because in the underworld of politics, his death didn't look like a suicide.
It looked like a point on a timeline, a silence mid-podcast, a secret buried in full view. He had been alone, they said. The truck was locked from inside, no signs of forced entry, no note, no sign of struggle. The gun was a revolver, his own. He died instantly. The autopsy didn't find evidence of foul play. Yet 2 years later, only after mounting public pressure, did the coroner finalize the ruling: suicide. The delay invited questions, like a broken faucet dripping doubt into a dark room. Some called him paranoid, a conspiracy theorist. But those who believed his work called him a patriot, a man willing to expose uncomfortable truths. Haney claimed DHS was destroying evidence showing that Abdul, one of the 9/11 hijackers, had entered the country, the agency allowing it and then covering it up, that emails had been deleted, documents shredded, policies shredded before they ever reached the public eye. He said he had proof, emails, phone calls, internal memos, all showing a system more interested in appearances than defense. After his death, his house went silent. The dog that used to sit by his feet stayed in the corner. His emails went unopened. His guns cleaned and put away. His house smelled of forgotten leftovers. Like a museum, to a life abandoned before it was over. Online, the debate began in whispers. Representative Steve King posted on social media that Haney's death looked like a deep state assassination. His followers believed him. They said that Haney was silenced because he knew too much, because he had evidence, because the walls of DHS were watching, because bullets were cheaper than lawsuits. They asked, why was there no note? Why the delay in ruling? Why would a man with guns commit suicide in his own truck on a Tuesday morning? They started pulling files. Headlines praising Haney from earlier decades, old interviews, a CLJ statements, court transcripts. They posted screenshots of tweets warning him, allegedly, to stop talking. They tried to connect dots, people, places, conversations he'd had. One conspiracy blogger said he knew of a 2017 executive order. Another said an email leaked praising the silencing of whistleblowers, but none of it proved a connection between the death and any dark conspiracy. Yet that absence of proof became its own proof. Silence proved something, they said. Because what are secrets, if not truths that can't be admitted? What is a suicide, if not a public square where the only words left behind are echoes? Haney's son recounted his last phone call with his father. They had argued over a grocery list. Haney had sounded tired, beat. He said he needed to sleep. He had no reason to kill himself, his son said. He'd recently remarried. He'd been writing a book. He'd asked people for interviews.
And that's how horror becomes personal. It's not the gun. It's not even the choice. It's what lies beneath. The idea that a person begins to believe his own story is bigger than his life, that even those who hold power break when exposed to the mirror of truth. There's a line a political scientist once wrote, "The tragedy of whistleblowers is they are given no witness protection, only public credibility, and that often fades." Haney had credibility once, but in his last years he felt isolated. He said he was being investigated, surveilled, silenced. He posted videos showing wars of attrition inside agencies. He accused bureaucrats of destroying his reputation. He said there were cameras in his house, evidence deleted from his laptop, strange cars parked outside, shadowy silhouettes reflected in his windows. He said he had changed locks 3 times in 6 months, and yet he still slept in his truck sometimes. Horror isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet house at night, every door locked, and the sound of your own breath sounding wrong. Honorifics like Mr. Witness or former DHS specialist don't keep the shadows from slipping in. When his death was finally ruled a suicide, some posted pictures of the coroner's file. They examined it for anomalies: hair, fibre, gun residue. They talked about editing software timestamps. They talked about gowners and towers. They said they wanted an independent test. They said they believed deep state suppression was still hiding in plain sight. Meanwhile, the grandchildren of 9/11 victims responded with anger. They said he may not have had every piece of evidence he claimed, but he shouldn't be erased. They demanded answers: a congressional hearing, a subpoena, a warrant, a transcript of his governor's interview, a non-redacted version of his FBI file. And yet, months passed. Nothing changed. No hearing, no subpoena, no new ruling. His files went cold. His name lost headline space. The deep state tried to stay buried. The world spun on. But those who watched the scene wanted more than news cycles. They wanted justice. They wanted confrontation. They wanted noise. It never came. Horror lives in that unfinished chapter, in the belief that someone once loved gave up, that trust was turned into a weapon, that proof can be dissolved not in water, but in silence. Here's the last thing Haney said on video. When you have an agent who wants to destroy evidence, you're no longer living in a democracy. You're living in a system that protects what it fears. Now look at the truck. Look at the gun. Look at the echo. Sometimes the real silence follows the loudest whisper, and sometimes the truth dies with the person who shouted it. That's where the horror lives now, not in the bullet. It started with 2 gunshots. Not in a war zone, not in a riot. In a quiet neighborhood in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. June 14, 2025. Melissa Hortman, Minnesota House Representative, former Speaker, wife, mother, was found on the front steps of her home, dead. Her husband, Venu Menon, lay beside her, also dead. Both were shot at close range. At first, it looked like a home invasion gone wrong. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, just blood on the porch and silence. Neighbors said they heard arguing earlier that morning, a man's voice, low, measured, like he wasn't angry, just certain. Then the sound of 2 sharp pops. Not wild, not panicked, deliberate. Police arrested a 44-year-old man named Daniel Kerr within hours, an HVAC technician, clean record, veteran, voted for Trump, attended church every Sunday. He confessed immediately. Said Melissa wasn't who people thought she was. Said he'd done what needed to be done. The murder shocked Minnesota, but it didn't stay there. It spread like fire. Online first, where everything gets twisted before it gets understood. Within hours, hashtags erupted across X, Reddit, and Telegram. Hashtag false flag, hashtag deep state hit, hashtag crisis actor. Some said the killer was fake, that he was a planted Democrat, that his confession was scripted. Others flipped it. They said Melissa and her husband never died at all, that it was all staged, a psyop, to stir sympathy, to distract from something bigger, to frame conservatives. Even Elon Musk reposted a thread about it. Donald Trump Jr. went live, claiming it looked too clean to be random. Their followers ran with it. They pulled photos of Daniel Kerr from 10 years ago and compared facial features, posted freeze frames, circled his eyes, said he looked too calm, too rehearsed. And just like that, the real story began to rot. The victims weren't mourned, they were dissected. Melissa's voting record was posted online. Clips of her debating climate change, women's rights, education policy, all reframed as radical. One influencer said she was eliminated by her own side for being too soft. Another said she knew something. Knew what?
They said the gun used had no serial number, even though it did. They said Kerr was smiling in court. He wasn't. He was shaking.
But no one cared about the truth anymore, because horror doesn't need facts, it just needs doubt. That's how psyops work. They make you question what's real. They turn grief into content and corpses into props. Melissa's daughter released a statement the next day. She said her mother was kind, brilliant, and deeply loved. Said they'd just spoken about dinner plans. Said they had tickets to a play. And within minutes, trolls flooded her page. Act better, one said. This girl's faking grief, another posted. One comment had 17,000 likes. Tell us what your mum really knew. It wasn't just death anymore, it was desecration. A second kind of violence. Digital, cold, infectious. Even as the facts were confirmed, that Kerr had no known ties to any group, that his motives seemed personal, that he had once been treated for delusions, none of it mattered. The narrative had already metastasized. Melissa Hortman had been erased, replaced by a symbol, a target, a ghost. And the killer? His trial hasn't even started, but in online circles, he's already a martyr, or a puppet, or both. Depends which thread you read. This is the new horror, not the violence itself, but what comes after. The distortion, the rewiring of truth, the way a bullet becomes a meme, the way murder becomes marketing. They say in war, the first casualty is the truth. But maybe now, the truth dies last, dragged behind likes, retweets, theories, lies, screaming all the way down. Melissa's last known message was a text to her husband. "Let's grill tonight. I got corn and that lemon stuff you like." Simple, sweet, normal. And it's that normalcy that makes the ending feel so unreal. Because, in a world this fractured, even love texts can be rewritten as codes. Even dinner plans can look like cover-ups. Even the dead don't get to rest. Not when the internet still needs content. Not when conspiracy is more clickable than compassion. Not when reality has become optional. So what really happened that day? 2 people died. And then something else, something colder, came alive, and it's still spreading.
Melissa Hortman's death twisted into digital warfare, and Flight 171's fiery descent all led to one truth. Sometimes, horror isn't a monster under the bed. It's the system, the lie, the silence. You don't have to believe every theory, but you'll never look at the headlines the same way again. Subscribe for more stories that the news forgets and nightmares remember. And comment below. What do you think? Cover-up or coincidence?